Dr. Vexthara moved through the vast library halls of the Zephyrian Research Center with the careful steps of someone who had spent 300 years walking the same paths. Her 4 arms carried data tablets filled with battle reports from civilizations that had died out long before her people had even discovered space travel. The tall, blue-skinned alien paused at a viewing window that looked out over the peaceful cities of her homeworld, where no war had been fought for over 2,000 years. The Zephyrian Collective had achieved something that most species could only dream of. They had eliminated conflict from their society completely. No crime, no violence, no disagreements that could not be solved through careful discussion and logical thinking. Their people lived in perfect harmony, sharing resources and knowledge freely across their 12 homeworlds, but this peace had created an unexpected problem. When the collective began exploring the galaxy and meeting other species, they discovered that almost every civilization they encountered had extensive histories of warfare. Battle tactics, weapons development, military strategy, and combat psychology seemed to be universal experiences that the Zephyrians had somehow skipped entirely. This gap in their knowledge troubled the collective's greatest minds. How could they truly understand other species if they had never experienced the defining force that shaped most galactic civilizations? The decision was made to study war as an academic subject, approaching it with the same methodical precision they applied to physics, mathematics, and stellar engineering. Dr. Vexthara had been chosen to lead this research 3 centuries ago, when she was still a young scientist, fascinated by the puzzle of organized violence. She had thrown herself into the work with enthusiasm, collecting battle records from hundreds of dead civilizations, analyzing their tactics, and building mathematical models to predict the outcomes of theoretical conflicts. Her team had created the most comprehensive database of military knowledge in the galaxy. They had studied the siege warfare of the ancient Korth Empire, the naval battles of the aquatic Morgandi, the aerial combat techniques of the winged Seraphi, and the guerrilla tactics used by dozens of smaller species fighting for their independence. Every strategy, every formation, every weapon design had been cataloged, analyzed, and reduced to neat mathematical formulas. The war room where Vexthara spent most of her time was a marvel of organized information. Holographic displays showed 3-dimensional recreations of famous battles, with colored lights representing different unit types moving across simulated battlefields. Complex equations covered the walls, calculating optimal troop distributions, supply line efficiency, and casualty ratios. Everything was clean, orderly, and perfectly logical. Her assistant, a younger Zephyrian named Kolenth, approached with the latest batch of data from their exploration ships. "Doctor, we have received interesting reports from the Outer Rim territories. Our scouts have discovered a new species calling themselves humans." Vexthara's large, dark eyes brightened with interest. New species meant new military data to study. "Tell me about their warfare patterns." Kolenth activated a holographic display showing a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. "The humans appear to be quite primitive by our standards. They have only recently developed space travel, and their weapons technology is several centuries behind our own. However, their historical records show an unusually high frequency of armed conflicts." The display zoomed in to show images captured by long-range sensors. Humans looked remarkably similar to Zephyrians, though they were shorter, had only 2 arms, and came in a variety of skin colors. Their cities were less organized than Zephyrian settlements, with a chaotic mix of architectural styles that suggested a turbulent history. "How frequent are these conflicts?" Vexthara asked, settling into her research chair with all 4 arms spread across the control panels. "Their historical database indicates that they have been engaged in some form of organized warfare for their entire recorded history. Our analysis suggests they have fought over resources, territory, religious beliefs, political systems, and what they call national pride. The variety of reasons for conflict is remarkable." Vexthara felt the familiar excitement that came with discovering a new subject for study. Most species had fighting in their past, but few had such a continuous history of warfare. What about their tactical development? Kolenth pulled up battlefield recordings that human historians had preserved. Their strategies appear to be quite primitive. They rely heavily on emotional motivation rather than logical calculation. Many of their most famous victories came from tactics that our models would predict as inefficient or even suicidal. The holographic display showed human soldiers charging across open ground while under heavy fire, ships ramming into larger vessels instead of maintaining safe distances, and commanders making decisions based on what humans called gut feelings, rather than careful analysis. Fascinating, Vexthara murmured, studying the chaotic scenes. They seem to approach warfare as an emotional rather than intellectual exercise. This could provide valuable insights into the psychological aspects of combat that we have not yet fully understood. There is more, Doctor. Recent intelligence suggests that humans have established several colonies in the Outer Rim. They appear to be expanding their territory, though their technology is still quite limited. Vexthara stood up quickly, her mind already racing with possibilities. This presents us with a unique opportunity. We could observe their military capabilities firsthand, perhaps even engage in a controlled study of their combat effectiveness. The idea excited her more than any research project she had undertaken in decades. All of her previous studies had been based on historical records and theoretical models. Here was a chance to observe an active military culture in real time, to see how their primitive but emotionally driven approach to warfare actually functioned in practice. I want to organize an expedition, she announced. We will take the research, vessel contemplation, and make contact with these humans. This could be the key to understanding the final piece of the warfare puzzle that has eluded us for so long. Kolenth looked uncertain. Doctor, our protocol suggests that first contact with primitive species should be handled by the diplomatic corps. Military observation might be seen as aggressive. Vexthara waved dismissively with two of her arms while continuing to study the human data with the other two. We are not warriors, Kolenth, we are scientists. The humans will surely understand that our interest is purely academic. We can offer them some of our advanced technology in exchange for the opportunity to study their military culture. She was already planning the expedition in her mind. They would approach peacefully, demonstrate their superior technology, and explain their research interests. The humans, being a primitive species, would likely be honored to have their military traditions studied by such an advanced civilization. It would be a simple exchange of knowledge. Begin preparations for departure, she ordered. I want our best recording equipment, behavioral analysis tools, and military simulation computers. This may be our chance to finally complete the galactic database of warfare studies. As Kolenth hurried away to organize the expedition, Doctor, Vexthara returned to her holographic displays, watching the recorded battles of human history with the detached interest of a scientist studying an interesting chemical reaction. She saw soldiers dying, cities burning, and entire armies being destroyed. But to her, these were simply data points in a vast equation. The Zephyrian scientist had no way of knowing that she was about to encounter something that could not be reduced to mathematical formulas or stored in a database. She was about to meet warriors who fought not because of logical calculations, but because of something far more dangerous and unpredictable than anything her 3 centuries of study had prepared. Her for Doc, she was about to discover the difference between studying war and facing those who lived it. The research vessel contemplation moved silently through the darkness of space toward the human colony system. Dr. Vexthara stood on the bridge, watching the distant lights of the human settlement grow larger on the main viewing screen. The Zephyrian ship was massive compared to anything the humans had built, stretching over 2 kilometers in length and filled with the most advanced scientific equipment in the galaxy. Captain Mordoon, the ship's commander, approached with the careful respect that military officers showed to senior researchers. Doctor, we are now within communication range of the human colony. Our sensors indicate a settlement of approximately 50,000 humans on the 3rd planet, which they call New Thermopylae. Vexthara nodded, pleased with the name choice. Her research had shown that Thermopylae was the site of an ancient human battle where a small force had held off a much larger army. The fact that these colonists had chosen such a name suggested they maintained strong connections to their military heritage. "What can you tell me about their defenses?" she asked, activating her personal recording devices to capture every detail of the encounter. "Quite primitive," Mordoon replied, consulting his tactical displays. "They have several orbital platforms that appear to be armed with kinetic weapons and what look like early energy cannons. Their defensive grid follows standard patterns that we studied in the archives of the old Corvan Empire. Nothing that would pose any threat to our shields." Vexthara felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Here was her chance to observe human military thinking in action. "Begin broadcasting our first contact protocols. Make it clear that we come in peace and wish to exchange knowledge." The communications officer, a young Zephryan named Telvara, activated the transmission array. "Broadcasting on all human frequencies, Doctor." The message explains our peaceful intentions and our desire to study their military history in exchange for advanced technology. The response came faster than expected. A stern human voice crackled through the ship's speakers, speaking in the harsh, clipped tones that Vexthara had learned to associate with military communications. "Unknown vessel, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, commanding officer of New Thermopylae. Defense Force, you are ordered to maintain your current distance and state your intentions clearly. Any approach toward our colony will be considered a hostile act." Vexthara blinked in surprise. According to her research, primitive species were usually eager to make contact with more advanced civilizations. The humans' immediate suspicion was unexpected but fascinating from a behavioral standpoint. "Respond with our standard diplomatic greeting," she instructed. "Explain that we are researchers, not conquerors. Surely they will understand the difference." Telvara transmitted the message, emphasizing the contemplation's scientific mission and the benefits of technological exchange. The human response came back even more sharply than before. "Alien vessel, we have no interest in your technology or your research. Withdraw from this system immediately, or we will be forced to defend ourselves." Captain Mordoon looked puzzled. "Doctor, their response does not match any of the first contact scenarios in our database. Most species show curiosity about superior technology, not immediate hostility." Vexthara found herself intrigued rather than concerned. This is exactly why we need to study them more closely. Their reaction patterns are unlike anything we have encountered before. Continue with the diplomatic approach, but begin passive scanning of their military installations. I want to understand their defensive preparations. What the Zephyrians saw through their sensors both amused and fascinated the research team. Within minutes of the first communication, the entire human colony had shifted into what could only be described as a war footing. Civilian transports were evacuating non-essential personnel from the orbital stations. Military vessels that had been conducting routine patrols suddenly changed course and began forming defensive formations around the colony. Most interesting of all was the pattern of movement. The humans were not following any of the standard defensive doctrines that Vexthara had studied. Instead of concentrating their forces to protect the most valuable targets, they were spreading their ships in loose formations that left gaps in their coverage. According to every tactical manual in the Zephyrian database, this was a terrible strategy that would allow an attacking force to break through their lines easily. "Look at this positioning," Vexthara said to her research team, pointing to the holographic display. "They are violating basic principles of defensive warfare. Their fleet is too spread out to provide mutual support, and they have left their primary settlement poorly defended." Kolent was recording everything with obvious excitement. "Perhaps this is an example of the primitive tactical thinking you mentioned in your reports? They appear to be making emotional decisions rather than logical ones." Dr. Vexthara was about to agree when something on the sensor display caught her attention. The human ships were not just moving randomly. There was a pattern to their movements, but it was unlike anything in her database. Instead of forming traditional defensive lines, they were creating what looked like overlapping zones of coverage. That would force any attacking force to face multiple threats from different angles. Interesting, she murmured. Their tactics are unconventional, but there may be a logic to them that we do not yet understand. The next transmission from the colony came from a different voice, older and more measured than the colonel who had spoken before. Alien vessel, this is Mayor Sarah Chun. I understand you claim to be researchers, but your timing is unfortunate. We have recently received reports of aggressive alien activities in nearby systems. I hope you will understand our caution. Vexthara perked up at this information. Ask them about these aggressive alien activities. This could provide valuable data about ongoing conflicts in the region. Before Telvara could transmit the question, Captain Mordoon interrupted with an urgent report. Doctor, our sensors are detecting incoming vessels. Multiple ships approaching from the edge of the system. The main display showed a new group of contacts moving toward them at high speed. These ships were clearly human in design, but much larger than the colonial defense vessels. As they drew closer, the Zephyrians could see that they were heavily armed and bore military markings. It appears to be a human fleet, Mordoon reported. 7 vessels, including what seems to be a battleship. They are broadcasting military identification codes. The lead ship opened communications immediately. The voice that came through was crisp, professional, and completely different from the colonists they had been speaking with. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Sarah Shun of the Earth Defense Force battleship Unbroken. You are in violation of colonial space. Identify yourselves and state your business or prepare to be fired upon. Vexthara felt a moment of confusion. The mayor of the colony had been named Sarah Chun as well. Were these humans related? And why was the military response so much more aggressive than the colonial authorities? Transmit our peaceful intentions again, she ordered. Explain that we are scientific researchers interested in cultural exchange. The response from the Unbroken was immediate and final. Unknown vessel, you have 30 minutes to withdraw beyond the system boundary. Any attempt to approach our colony will result in military action. This is your only warning. Dr. Vexthara stared at the display, showing the human fleet. Their ships were tiny compared to the Contemplation, with weapons that her database classified as obsolete. According to every calculation she could make, the Zephyrian vessel could destroy the entire human force without taking significant damage, but something about the humans' behavior troubled her. They were not backing down despite facing obviously superior technology. Instead, their ships were moving into attack formations, as if they actually intended to fight a battle they could not possibly win. Doctor, Captain Mordoon said quietly, perhaps we should withdraw and attempt contact at a different time. Their hostility seems genuine, and further provocation might compromise our research objectives. Vexthara watched the human ships maneuvering with growing fascination. Here was something her 3 centuries of study had not prepared her for. The humans were behaving in a completely illogical manner, choosing confrontation over the obvious benefits of peaceful contact with a superior civilization. No, she said finally. This is exactly what we came here to study. I want to see how their military minds work under pressure, maintain position, and continue monitoring their movements. If they truly intend to attack us, it will provide invaluable data about their combat psychology. She had no way of knowing that she was about to witness something that would shatter her understanding of warfare forever. The humans approaching them were not just following military doctrine or tactical guidelines. They were coming to protect their people, and that made them far more dangerous than any equation could predict. Dr. Vexthara watched the countdown timer on her display reach 0. The 30 minutes Captain Chun had given them to withdraw had passed, and the Contemplation remained in position above New Thermopylae. She had convinced Captain Mordoon to stay, arguing that this was a unique opportunity to observe human military behavior under stress. The human fleet had spent the entire half-hour repositioning their ships in patterns that made no sense according to Zephyrian tactical analysis. Instead of forming a defensive wall between the alien vessel and their colony, They had spread out in a loose formation that seemed designed to surround the much larger contemplation. Their positioning is tactically unsound, Kolenth observed, studying the sensor readings. They have divided their forces and given us multiple weak points to exploit. Any competent military commander would concentrate firepower against our strongest shields. Vexthara nodded, but something nagged at her about the human movements. There was an underlying pattern that she could not quite identify, as if the humans were following a doctrine that existed outside her extensive database of military knowledge. The communication system crackled to life with Captain Chen's voice. "Alien vessel, your time is up. Last chance to withdraw peacefully." Captain Mordoon looked to Vexthara for instructions. The Zephyrian military officer was trained for exploration and defense, but he had never actually fought a battle. None of them had. The collective's peaceful nature meant that their military existed only in theory. "We should demonstrate our superiority," Vexthara decided. "A limited engagement will show them the futility of resistance while providing us with valuable combat data. Use minimum force to disable one of their smaller vessels? Once they see our capabilities, they will surely agree to peaceful negotiations." It was a logical plan based on everything Vexthara had learned about warfare. Overwhelming technological advantage should lead to quick surrender, minimizing casualties on both sides. Every military simulation she had run supported this approach. Captain Mordoon activated the Contemplation's weapon systems. The massive ship carried defensive armaments that were centuries ahead of human technology. A single precise shot from their particle beam should be enough to disable a human vessel without destroying it completely. Targeting the smallest ship in their formation, Mordoon reported. Firing. A brilliant beam of energy lanced out from the Contemplation, striking one of the human patrol ships. The vessel's shields flared and failed immediately, and its engines went dark. According to Zephyrian calculations, the crew should now send a surrender signal and withdraw from the battle. Instead, something happened that no one on the Contemplation had expected. The disabled human ship did not retreat. Instead, it used its remaining momentum to drift closer to the Zephyrian vessel, while its crew worked frantically to restore power. Even more surprising, the rest of the human fleet did not fall back in the face of superior firepower. They accelerated toward the Contemplation with what could only be described as aggressive intent. "Fascinating," Vexthara breathed, recording every detail. "They are not following standard surrender protocols. Their response to technological disadvantage is to increase aggression rather than seek negotiation." The battleship Unbroken led the human charge, its weapons blazing despite the obvious futility of the attack. The kinetic shells and energy beams struck the Contemplation's shields and scattered harmlessly, but the humans kept firing as they closed the distance. Captain Mordoon looked confused. "Doctor, they are attempting to engage us at close range. This makes no tactical sense. Our shields can absorb their weapons indefinitely." "Continue observing," Vexthara ordered. "This behavior is unprecedented in our database. I want to see what they plan to accomplish." What the humans accomplished was something that would haunt Zephyrian military theorists for generations. Instead of engaging in a long-range battle, where their technological disadvantage would be most apparent, they rushed into close combat where raw determination could matter more than advanced weapons. The first shock came when the disabled patrol ship suddenly flared back to life. Its crew had somehow restored partial power and was now steering directly toward the Contemplation's hull. Captain Mordoon ordered evasive maneuvers, but the massive research vessel was not designed for quick movement. "They are attempting a ramming attack," Mordoon reported with disbelief. "Our tactical computers indicate this would destroy their ship while causing minimal damage to our hull. It makes no logical sense." Vexthara watched in fascination as the small human vessel accelerated toward them. Through the communication channels, she could hear the human crew shouting something that sounded like a battle cry. Their voices were filled with emotion that her translator could barely process. The patrol ship struck the Contemplation's shield barrier and exploded in a brilliant flash. The Zephyrian shields absorbed the impact easily, but something about the attack sent a chill through the research vessel's crew. The humans had just sacrificed an entire ship and its crew for no apparent tactical advantage. Why would they do such a thing? Kolenth asked, his voice filled with confusion. The mathematical outcome was obvious. They gained nothing from that attack. Before Vexthara could answer, more human ships were closing in, their weapons firing continuously despite the apparent hopelessness of their situation. The Unbroken had reached point-blank range and was pouring everything it had into the Contemplation's shields. Captain Chun's voice came through the communications, and now it carried an edge that made even the peaceful Zephyrians feel uncomfortable. You want to see how humans fight? Let me show you. The Unbroken suddenly changed course, using its engines to spin around the Contemplation's hull while maintaining fire. Other human ships followed the same pattern, creating a swirling cloud of attackers that made it difficult for the larger vessel to target them effectively. They're using our size against us, Captain Mordoon observed. Their smaller ships can maneuver around our weapon systems faster than we can track them. This was not in any of the tactical manuals Vexthara had studied. Large ships were supposed to have the advantage over smaller ones due to superior firepower and armor. The humans were somehow negating that advantage through pure aggression and unconventional tactics. Fire at will, Vexthara ordered. Disable as many ships as possible. I want to study their response to casualties. The Contemplation's weapons spoke again, and 2 more human vessels were crippled. But instead of retreating, the damaged ships continued to fight with whatever systems still functioned. One ship, its main engines destroyed, used its maneuvering thrusters to stay in the battle while its crew manually aimed their weapons. Dr. Vexthara found herself watching something that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare. The humans were not fighting according to any rational plan. They were not trying to minimize casualties or preserve their forces for future battles. They were throwing everything they had at the Contemplation as if this single engagement would determine the fate of their entire species. Doctor, Captain Mordoon said urgently, their tactics are becoming increasingly erratic. The Unbroken is making another ramming approach, but this time they have not lost main power. On the main display, the human battleship was indeed accelerating directly toward the Contemplation. But this was not the desperate move of a disabled vessel. This was a deliberate choice by a ship that still had other options. Captain Chun's voice filled the bridge one more time, and now it carried something that Vexthara's translator identified as grim satisfaction. You studied war like it was a game. Let me teach you the difference between theory and practice. The Unbroken struck the Contemplation's shields at full speed. The impact was tremendous, causing the massive Zephyrian vessel to shudder throughout its entire structure. Alarms began sounding as systems overloaded from the shock. Shields down to 60%, Mordoon reported. Hull integrity compromised in sections 7 through 12. They actually managed to damage us. Vexthara stared at the tactical display in shock. According to every calculation, every simulation, every theoretical model she had ever studied, this should have been impossible. The humans' primitive weapons and inferior technology should not have been able to threaten a vessel as advanced as the Contemplation, but the evidence was right in front of her. The humans had found a way to hurt them, not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but through sheer willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Doctor, Kolenth said quietly, perhaps we should withdraw and reconsider our approach. These humans do not seem to fight according to any logical principles. Vexthara continued to stare at the sensor readings, trying to understand what she was seeing. The remaining human ships were still attacking, still pouring fire into the Contemplation, despite having lost more than half their fleet. They showed no signs of retreat, no indication that they were capable of surrender. For the first time in her 3 centuries of studying warfare, Dr. Vexthara began to wonder if there might be aspects of combat that could not be reduced to mathematical formulas or stored in databases. The humans were teaching her something that all her research had failed to reveal. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Unbroken as her ship pulled away from the alien vessel's hull. The impact had damaged her own ship almost as much as it had hurt the enemy, but she could see the results on her tactical display. The massive alien ship was wounded now, its shields flickering and sparks flying from damaged sections around her. The bridge crew worked with the calm efficiency that came from years of training and combat experience. They had lost 3 ships already, but no one showed any sign of panic or despair. This was what they had trained for their entire lives. "Damage report," Chun ordered, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Forward armor compromised, main engines at 70%, weapon systems operational," her tactical officer reported. "We can still fight, Captain," Chun nodded grimly. The Unbroken had been built for war, designed by people who understood that sometimes peaceful solutions were not possible. Every system on the ship had backup systems, and every backup had alternatives. Her crew knew how to fight with damaged equipment because they had been taught that perfect conditions were a luxury that warriors could not afford. On the main screen, she could see the alien ship trying to reposition itself for a better firing angle. The massive vessel moved slowly, like a giant trying to swat flies. Its weapons were powerful, but they were designed for long-range combat against opponents who would follow predictable tactical patterns. "All ships, this is Chun," she broadcast to her remaining fleet. "Continue close-range harassment. Do not give them time to use their superior firepower advantage." The surviving human vessels responded immediately, darting around the alien ship like pack hunters surrounding a much larger prey animal. They fired continuously, their weapons barely scratching the enemy's armor, but forcing the aliens to constantly adjust their defenses. Inside the contemplation, Dr. Vextara was experiencing something she had never felt before in her 3 centuries of life: fear, not the intellectual understanding of fear that she had read about in her research, but the real thing, the cold certainty that she might actually die in the next few minutes. "Doctor, we need to withdraw," Captain Mordoon said urgently. "Our shield generators are overheating from the constant impacts. These humans fight like they have nothing to lose." Vextara tried to focus on her scientific observations, but the human tactics were unlike anything in her database. They were not trying to win through superior strategy or technological advantage. They were simply refusing to lose no matter what the cost. "Look at their attack patterns," she said to Collinth, pointing at the tactical display with a shaking hand. "They are not following any logical sequence. Each ship is acting independently, making decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than overall battle plans." On the screen, one of the human destroyers had lost its main weapons but was using its engines to ram damaged sections of the Contemplation's hull. The pilot was deliberately targeting areas where the shields were weakest, using his ship as a guided missile. "This is madness," Collinth whispered. "They are destroying themselves for no tactical gain." But Vextara was beginning to understand that the humans were gaining something that did not appear in any military manual. Each sacrifice, each seemingly pointless attack, was wearing down not just the Contemplation's defenses, but the crew's will to fight. The Zephyrians had studied war as an intellectual exercise. They had never learned to cope with the emotional reality of watching enemies who refused to give up. Captain Chun opened a communication channel directly to the alien ship. Her voice was steady, professional, but underneath it was something that made every Zephyrian on the bridge feel uncomfortable. "Alien vessel, you made a mistake when you decided to threaten our colony. You studied our history, but you did not understand what you were reading. Humans do not surrender. We do not retreat when our families are threatened. We fight until we win or until we die." The words hit Dr. Vextara like a physical blow. In all her research, she had cataloged thousands of battles, analyzed countless strategies, and studied the military histories of hundreds of species. But she had always approached war as something that happened to other people. In other times, for academic reasons, the humans were showing her what war really meant. It was not about tactical formations or mathematical calculations. It was about people who were willing to die for something they believed in. "Doctor," Captain Mordoon reported. "The Unbroken is making another attack run. They are targeting our weapon systems directly." On the main display, the human battleship was charging toward them again. This time, Captain Chun was not attempting a ramming attack. Instead, she was using her ship's superior maneuverability to stay just outside the Contemplation's defensive fields while concentrating all her firepower on a single point, the Unbroken's. Weapons hammered the same section of the alien ship over and over again. Each impact weakened the shields a little more, created a little more damage, brought the massive vessel a little closer to critical failure. "She is learning our defensive patterns," Vexthara observed with professional admiration mixed with growing terror. "Captain Chun is adapting her tactics based on our responses. This is not the primitive thinking we expected. Indeed, the human Captain was proving to be far more dangerous than any Zephyrian military simulation had predicted. She was not following a predetermined battle plan. Instead, she was making constant adjustments based on what she observed, turning the engagement into a deadly dance where each move built upon the last. "All weapons, target the Unbroken," Captain Mordoon ordered. "If we can eliminate their commander, the rest of their fleet might surrender." It was a logical tactical decision based on standard military doctrine. Remove the enemy leader and the remaining forces would lose coordination and morale. Vexthara had seen this principle work in hundreds of historical battles, but the humans were not following historical patterns. The Contemplation's most powerful weapons focused on the Unbroken, finally scoring direct hits that crippled the battleships engines and left it drifting in space. Captain Chun's ship was finished as an effective fighting unit, its hull breached in multiple places and its weapon systems failing instead of surrender. Something else happened. The remaining human ships immediately moved to protect their damaged flagship, placing themselves between the Unbroken and the Contemplation. More importantly, instead of falling apart without their leader, they became even more aggressive. "This is Commander Torres of the Destroyer Ranger," came a new voice over the communication system. "Captain Chun is injured but alive. All ships, continue the attack. Make them pay for every meter of space." The human fleet, reduced now to just 3 operational vessels, pressed their attack with even greater fury than before. They were not fighting to win anymore. They were fighting for revenge, for honor, for the simple human refusal to be defeated by a superior enemy. Dr. Vexthara watched in horror as one of the human destroyers deliberately steered into the Contemplation's main engine array, destroying itself in a massive explosion that knocked out the alien ship's primary propulsion systems. The pilot had sacrificed his life to ensure that the Contemplation could not escape. "Doctor, we are dead in space," Captain Mordoon reported. "Main engines destroyed, weapon systems failing, shield generators about to overload. We need to surrender." The word surrender hung in the air like something alien and impossible. The Zephyrian Collective had never needed to surrender because they had never fought a real war. The concept existed in their databases, but none of them had ever imagined they would need to use it. "Broadcast surrender signals," Vexthara ordered. Quietly, "Tell them we wish to negotiate." The response came from the crippled Unbroken, where Captain Chun had apparently regained consciousness. Her voice was weak but still carried that iron determination that had terrified the Zephyrians throughout the battle. "Alien vessel, you can surrender to the colony authorities when they arrive. But understand this, we did not fight you because we thought we could win. We fought you because you threatened our people. That is something you cannot learn from books or databases. That is something you can only understand by living it." As rescue ships from New Thermopylae began approaching the battle site, Dr. Vexthara finally understood what she had been missing in her 3 centuries of military research. War was not about tactics or weapons or strategic calculations. War was about ordinary people who were willing to do extraordinary things when everything they loved was at stake. The humans had taught her the difference between studying war and being warriors. And the lesson had cost her everything she thought she knew about the nature of conflict. 3 days after the battle, Dr. Vexthara sat in a holding cell aboard the New Thermopylae orbital station. The contemplation floated nearby, a broken giant being carefully examined by human engineers who seemed amazed by its advanced technology. Most of her crew had survived the engagement, though several had been injured when the humans' final desperate attacks had breached their hull. The irony was not lost on her, that she was now a prisoner of the primitive species she had come to study. The tables had been turned completely. Instead of observing human military behavior from a position of superiority, she was experiencing it firsthand as the defeated enemy. Captain Sarah Chun entered the holding area, moving slowly with the help of a walking stick. The human commander had suffered serious injuries during the battle, but she had insisted on conducting the interrogation personally. Her arm was in a cast, and there were bandages covering burns on the left side of her face, but her eyes were as sharp and determined as ever. "Dr. Vextara," Chun said, settling into a chair across from the alien scientist. "I have been reading the preliminary reports about your mission. You came here to study our military capabilities?" Vextara nodded, feeling a shame that was completely foreign to her peaceful species. "Yes, my people have spent centuries analyzing warfare as an academic subject. We thought we understood the principles of combat, but we had never encountered actual warriors before." Chun leaned back in her chair, studying the tall blue alien with something that might have been sympathy. "What did you learn?" The question was simple, but the answer was so complex that Vextara hardly knew where to begin. How could she explain to this human warrior that everything her civilization believed about warfare had been proven wrong in the span of a few hours? "We learned that war is not what we thought it was," she said finally. "We studied it like a mathematical problem, analyzing strategies and tactics as if they were chemical formulas. We collected data about battles and weapons and formations, but we never understood what drives people to fight." Chun nodded slowly. "And what do you think drives people to fight?" Vextara was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything she had witnessed during the battle. The human crew members who had steered their ships into certain death to protect their comrades. The pilots who had continued fighting with damaged vessels that should have been abandoned. The captain who had rammed her own ship into a superior enemy because surrender was not an option. "Love," she said at last. "You fight because you love something more than you fear death. Your people, your home, your way of life. We never understood that warfare is not about destroying enemies. It is about protecting what matters most to you." The human captain was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "My daughter lives in the colony below. She is 8 years old and wants to be a scientist when she grows up. When your ship appeared in our system, I was not thinking about military tactics or strategic advantages. I was thinking about making sure she would be safe." Dr. Vextara felt something twist in her chest that she had never experienced before. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. She had approached this encounter as an academic exercise, but for the humans it had been about survival, about protecting their families and their future. "We caused this conflict through our arrogance," she admitted. "We assumed that, because we had superior technology, we could dictate the terms of our interaction. We never considered that you might have reasons to refuse. Our offer that had nothing to do with logic or calculation." Chu stood up slowly, her injuries making the movement difficult. "Dr. Vextara, I want to show you something. Will you come with me?" The alien scientist followed the human captain through the corridors of the space station. They passed medical bays where wounded crew members from both sides were being treated together, human and Zephyrian doctors working side by side to save lives. They walked past repair crews where human engineers were carefully studying pieces of Zephyrian technology while alien technicians explained how their systems worked. Finally, they reached an observation deck that looked down on the colony planet. Below, New Thermopylae spread across the surface like a patchwork of lights and gardens, home to 50,000 humans who had traveled across the galaxy to build new lives. "This is what we were protecting," Chun said quietly. "Not territory, or resources, or political power. Home, the place where our children play, and our families live and our people build their dreams for the future." Vextara stared down at the planet, trying to understand the emotional connection that the humans felt to this distant world. The Zephyrian Collective owned 12 star systems, with billions of citizens living in perfect harmony. But looking at the small human colony, she realized that her people had gained peace by giving up something essential. They had eliminated conflict by eliminating the passion that made conflict possible. They had achieved harmony by removing the strong emotions. That led to both war and love, both hatred and fierce loyalty. In their quest for perfect logic, they had lost the ability to care about anything strongly enough to fight for it. "Captain Chun," Vexthara said slowly, "may I ask you a question that might seem strange?" "Go ahead." "If you knew that fighting U.S. would result in the destruction of your entire fleet, would you have made the same choice?" Chun did not hesitate. "Yes, because if we had not fought, our children would have grown up knowing that their parents had surrendered without even trying to protect them. Some things are worth more than survival." Dr. Vexthara nodded, finally understanding something that had puzzled her throughout her long career. Her database contained records of thousands of battles where smaller forces had fought against impossible odds, where armies had chosen certain death over surrender, where people had sacrificed everything for causes that seemed hopeless. She had always classified these as examples of primitive thinking, emotional decision-making that ignored logical analysis. Now she realized that these warriors had understood something that her peaceful civilization had forgotten. There were things worth dying for, and those things gave life its meaning. "Captain, what will happen to us now?" she asked. Chun turned away from the observation window. "That depends on your government. We have sent a full report of this incident to Earth Command, along with our recommendations. Your people made contact with hostile intentions, but they also seem to have learned something from the experience." "And what would your recommendations be?" "That the Zephyrian Collective and humanity establish formal diplomatic relations. That we share knowledge and technology on equal terms without either side trying to dominate the other. And that next time your people want to study warfare, they ask first instead of just showing up and demanding cooperation." Over the following weeks, as negotiations continued between the two species, Dr. Vexthara found herself spending long hours with Captain Chun and her crew. She listened to their stories about Earth, about the struggles that had shaped human civilization, about the wars they had fought and the peace they had built. Slowly, she began to understand that the humans had not achieved harmony by eliminating conflict, but by learning to channel it toward positive goals. They fought fiercely when threatened, but they also worked together to build something better for their children. When the time came for the contemplation to return to Zephyrian space, Dr. Vexthara carried with her something more valuable than any data she could have collected. She carried the knowledge that her people had been studying war for centuries, but they had never learned the most important lesson of all. War was not about tactics or weapons or strategic calculations. War was about people who cared enough about something to risk everything to protect it. And perhaps, she thought as she watched the human colony shrink behind them, that was a lesson worth learning. As the contemplation jumped to hyperspace, carrying its crew home to report their findings, Captain Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of her repaired battleship. The Unbroken was ready for space again, its battle scars repaired but not forgotten. Her daughter had asked her what the aliens had wanted, and Ching had struggled to find an answer that an 8-year-old could understand. Finally, she had said that they were visitors who had wanted to learn about humans, and they had learned something important. They had learned that humans do not fight because they are good at war. They fight because they are good at love. And sometimes that made all the difference in the galaxy.